Hope everyone's having a good morning, and I hope that you're happy to be here. I know I'm happy to be here, and I'm getting excited that I have the opportunity to worship with you, worship our God together. Looking at some of the sermons I've done in the past couple weeks, I decided that it was time to get back to the fundamentals, and it's time to do over some drills again, and basically look at, as if you're a child of God, these are the things that are expected of you, some of the basic fundamentals. And so I decided to talk about anger. And what does God expect out of one of His children if they become angry, or when they become angry? What does He expect out of us? One of the biggest problems I had with this sermon is I could not pick an introduction. I had like 7 stories stored up that I could talk about people getting angry and what they did. I had a really funny story about a guy who threw a plastic Coke bottle at me on the interstate a couple months ago because he was angry because I couldn't get over. I mean, that would have been a funny, silly story, and I'll tell you all about it later. There's obviously a lot of Bible stories we could talk about when people got angry and then they did something. Jesus got angry about what was going on in the temple, so He went and cleansed out the temple. God was angry at Moses for being disobedient and striking the rock when He was told to speak to it, so He told Moses he could not enter the promised land. God was angry with the children of Israel because they were complaining about eating the manna, so He made them eat quail till it came out of their nose. Of course, we could give unrighteous examples. Saul was angry at David because he had all the popularity from the people from Israel. So he threw a spear at him. And he did that twice. And then later he gets angry at his own son Jonathan, and he throws a spear at him too. So what we see in all of those examples, or whatever introduction I would have given, is that people get angry and then they do something. So you become angry, and what the anger is energy, and then you use that energy to get something accomplished, whether it's destructive or constructive. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, you're going to use that energy from your anger regardless. And I think that's what Paul's getting at here at Ephesians 4. Ephesians 4:26, if you're already looking at it, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil. And then, of course, I think here he's quoting Psalm 4:4-5, which basically says the same thing. That it is okay to be angry. You're going to be angry, but when you're angry, do not sin. The next phrase, do not let the sun go down on your wrath, which I just think that means is if you're angry, accomplish the anger, resolve the anger while it's still daylight. Don't just try to idly let it sit by and let it burn and fester overnight. No, accomplish something. And that may be that you need to do something, or maybe that means that you just need to make peace with it. Regardless, accomplish the anger, resolve the anger, and then he ends the next phrase, nor give place to the devil. What it is when we become angry and we have all that potential energy, we're going to do something, that's when Satan wants to show up and say, okay, well, if you're going to do something, let me try to persuade you to do this. Because, of course, what Satan's primary goal is to get us to sin. So you see someone with all this energy, he's going to try to veer them off that direction towards sin, instead of getting something accomplished, resolving your anger in a godly way. Now, I could use the sermon, and I didn't want to do this, but talk about self-control. But I wanted to look at this from a different perspective. And the perspective that I've already been explaining is that what I want to look at is 5 different examples of when we get angry and how we resolve that anger. Are you going to resolve that anger in a godly way or in a sinful way? So we'll look at 5 examples of that. My very first one that I want to look at is very, very generic. What if you are angry at someone? And I basically just need this to understand my blueprint of how this sermon is going to go. So you're just angry at somebody on the street. They said something rude to you. Maybe you're in the car and someone does something that makes you angry. What do? Well, are you motivated to be violent, or are you motivated to reconcile? Are you motivation for violence or reconciliation? I'm going to throw these verses up here on the screen. Psalms 29:11 says, a fool vents off his feelings, but a wise man holds them back. Proverbs 15:18, a wrathful man stirs up strife, but he who is slow to anger allays contention. And allay there just means to diminish or to put at rest. That you diminish the contention. And we learn something about God's nature in Psalm 11:5. The Lord tests the righteous, But the wicked and the one who loves violence, his soul hates. So the man that's a fool that wants to vent all of his feelings on someone in frustration through violence, or it's the wrathful man that just wants to stir up strife. Someone that's just looking for a fight. Someone who wants to be violent, desires violence. That's something that God hates. He hates violent people. So you can ask yourself this, is when I am in a situation where I'm angry at someone, is my first thought, well, let's get violent? Or really, is that my second thought? Is that my third thought? Let's get violent. Because that's something that God hates. It's something that God hates. I was looking, and this was going to be another one of my introductions. But maybe many of us are familiar with the Westboro Baptist Church. And it's that little group in Kentucky that goes around, and they like to picket and protest military funerals. And of course, they've received a lot of heat because they're very cruel and they're very vulgar in their protests. And what they want, and Business Insider did an article about it a couple of weeks ago, what they want is this. They want someone to get violent with them. Because if they can get someone to get violent with them, they have a lawsuit. And this is how they're making their money. It's preying on people's anger. Okay, you're angry at me. I want you to get angry with me. So you will vent out all your feelings at me through violence, and then I get to sue you. But this is how people even are making their money, because it's so natural for humans to want to do this, to resort to violence. Now, of course, what if we use that anger to reconcile? Well, that would be the second half of all these verses. A wise man would hold them back. A wise man would have self-control. But he who is slow to anger allays contention. So someone who's angry and goes, you know what, I'm going to think about this. I'm going to be patient. I'm going to work this out, because what I want to do is diminish the contention here. And if you're angry with something, that's something you could even say, hey, I'm angry about the way you're treating me, but what I want to do with this is I want to somehow diminish this contention between you and me. I think that would be a great way to handle that situation. And again, this very first point is very generic, but it gives you the idea of what I'm going to go at here. What about when we're angry at our children? How many of us are angry at our children right now? I'm not going to ask that question. I don't want a hand. But I imagine this happens a lot. That if you're going to be living with your child, training your child, trying to teach your child, there's going to be times that you're going to get angry with them. Because they're children. They're going to make mistakes. They're humans. And it's our responsibility, if you're a parent, is to get them out of that, to help them through those mistakes. I think a very big problem in our society is when people actually don't get angry with their children. That instead of seeing what their child does, and instead of wanting to correct it because they're angry about it, instead they just ignore it. I think that is a very big problem. They ignore the child, and what they end up doing is provoking them to wrath. And I'll make that point a little bit later. So if you're angry at your child, or you want to provoke your children to wrath, or is it motivation for training and better admonition? And of course, I just stole this from Ephesians 6:4. And you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and the admonition of the Lord. So fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath. When you discipline your child, the purpose of this is not for your child to be wrathful about it, but the purpose of it is to train them and admonish them in the Lord, so that they could reflect more godly attributes in the way that they live their lives. This is the point of discipline. Now, what you could do, as we've already read in Proverbs, is when you're angry at your child, you could just completely vent all your emotions through their discipline, couldn't you? And you could discipline them with the attitude is, I'm just angry and I want to take it out on you. Well, what would be the effect of that in the child? Well, what you're doing is you're teaching them how to be wrathful. That this is how they're going to raise their children later on in life. That they're going to discipline just through pure wrath. Not through training, not through discipline, but just through wrath. And as I already said, there's something on the other end of the spectrum that is just as bad. And that's you provoke your children to wrath by just ignoring them. So when you're angry with them, you don't talk to them about it, you don't discipline about them, you just ignore them and let them do what they want to do. And what happens to children when they don't receive attention from their parents? They usually act worse, don't they? Because what it is they crave the attention that a parent needs to give them. And probably many of us that are parents, we understand that. Either of those things could provoke your children to wrath. When you're angry at your children, instead, use that as energy and motivation to train them up in the ways of the Lord. That discipline them. I want to make you a better person. I don't want you to make anyone angry again. I'm going to teach you better. And that would be obviously through discipline, through training and admonishing your children. Ecclesiastes 7:9. Just want to make this point. Do not hasten in your spirit to be angry, for anger rests in the bosom of fools. I imitate the stuff my dad did when he gets angry. I remember the things that he used to do, his facial expressions, the way he hold his shoulders back. Just those things I recognize, and I remember my father doing that when he got angry. What I noticed is maybe the very, very few times I've ever had to get on to a child, I did the same things my father did. And it kind of worries you. Oh no, I'm turning into my dad. And I think a lot of us that are actually our parents and actually do have to discipline our children on a regular basis, we see our parents in the way we discipline. So why don't you think about it this way. The way you discipline your children, the way your children will always remember how you handled your anger is the way they're going to repeat it to your grandchildren. It's going to be the same way. If they remember their father or their mother as someone who was slow to anger, that did not hasten in the spirit of anger, then they're going to react in the same way to their children. That they're going to remember that those that are angry fast. That's what I'm trying to say. Become angry fast are fools. I don't want to be a fool. And they're going to learn that from you, your parent. So that's point number 2, how we handle our anger at our children. What about when I'm angry at my church family? Number 3, angry at my church family. Is that motivation for destruction, or is that motivation for correction? And I don't have these verses on the screen because they're too long, but if you turn me to Colossians 3. Colossians 3, Paul here talking about what's expected out of the new creation, the new man, the person that's been raised through baptism with Jesus Christ, the person who's a Christian now. This is the way they're supposed to live. Colossians 3:8. But now you yourselves are to put off all these: anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy language out of your mouth. Do not lie to one another, since you have put off the old man with his deeds, and have put on the new man, who is renewed in the knowledge according to the image of him who created him. Now, before we talk about our topic, let's analyze the passage. So he says we need to put off anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy. Now, we've already read a passage that Paul said we could be angry. So what I take this passage is to look at both of the passages, is this is someone who's angry but perverts their anger to do something evil. And that's the definition of malice, isn't it? It's a desire to do evil. So this one is somebody is angry, but instead of handling it in a constructive way, they want to do something evil with their anger. And that's when they end up becoming blasphemous. They end up speaking filthy language out of their mouth. Verse 9, that's when they end up lying to each other. They start practicing what the old man used to do. So they become angry at their church family, and then they have this desire. They want to do evil to their church family. That's something the old man used to do. That's not something the new man is supposed to be living. And what it is a perversion in verse 10. To ask this question, I think this really goes well with our theme this year. Why, as humans, why do we get angry? Why are humans designed to be angry sometimes? I think that answer is verse 10. That those of this new man, according to the image of him who created him. Who else gets angry? And if you read the Old Testament, you've seen him get angry a lot. God gets angry. That's part of his nature. That's part of his personality. So what happens is when he created man in his own image, he gave us one of his personality traits. And that is that we have the ability to be angry about something, to see something evil done to us, evil done to someone else, and we can get angry about it. We were designed to be angry because we've been made in his image. Now what we've been designed to do, however, is handle that anger the way God would handle that anger. To do some type of righteous indignation. That we would be righteous with our anger. That all that energy stored up. Now what happens is when we do something unrighteous with our anger, we pervert one of the personalities that God has given us. a tool that God has given us because we're not handling it the way we should in His own image. Also turn to James 4:1-2. We'll analyze this one quickly and go back to our main point here. James 4:1-2. He asks the question, basically, why do y'all fight all the time? Why are there wars? Why are there disputes among your own church family, your brethren? James 4, verse 1. Where do wars and fights come from among you? Do they not come from your desires for pleasure that war in your members? You lust and you do not have. You murder and covet and cannot obtain. You fight and war. Yet you do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask amiss, that you may spend it on your pleasures. That this here, why are there, you have fights among you? And basically I think what he's hinting at is jealousy. This is what he's talking about. You covet something, you want something, but you cannot obtain it because you are just filled with anger and dread and something that's malicious, malice, as we've already talked about. And he says you could ask for it, but you don't ask for it. And even if you did ask for it, you would not receive because you ask amiss. You're asking because you want to fulfill your own desires, your own pleasures, not because it would actually be beneficial to you in your spiritual walk with God. Now, this is what happens to every church family. It happened back to the church family that James was writing to, the one that Colossians, it happened to them, and it happens to us as well. That we become angry with our church family, and instead of wanting to correct and rebuke and exhort, instead we want to destroy. Someone has made me angry here. Oh, I'm going to destroy them. Now, it may be a brawl out in the foyer. I've heard stories that something like that has happened before, but I think we're too clever and too smart to get violent. Usually what we want to do is we want to hurt them mentally. We want to destroy them socially. So we resort to gossip. We resort to slander. And we get angry, and we use that motivation from our anger to destroy somebody. That's awful. What it should be would be motivation. I'm angry about the situation between me and my brother or me or my sister. So instead of wanting to destroy this person, instead I want to correct. I want to reconcile and use that anger for proper motivation. Let me say something in a way, something that's happened to me, never here. I think it's something that needs to be said. Some of us maybe just lack the courage to go and actually talk to somebody to correct the situation that we're angry about. And I think you need to be courageous. I don't think God gave us a spirit of fear. But maybe even if it's not that you're not courageous enough, you're just worried that you're not going to be able to make the words come out of your mouth that need to be said. I'm more sympathetic to someone that says that. And what I need to do is because I can't get it out and I'm worried about actually speaking it, instead I'm going to write that person a note or a letter. And that maybe that will correct the situation. I think that's a great way to do it. The problem is I know in my life, I have received letters and notes from people that wanted to correct me, that were angry at me in some way. And it ended with something that says like, love the brother or the sister. Love Andrew. And when I get something like that, I go, okay, well, this is something that I can correct. This is something I can change. Obviously, this person is angry. They're trying to motivate it to do something good. I can make the correction. And maybe if there's something I don't understand about the letter that I was given, I could go and tell that person or write back to that person and say, hey, I don't really understand what you were angry about. Could you tell me more? That seems like a very good solution. Now, what I don't like is when I've gotten notes or letters that had no name on it. That they just wanted to tell me how angry they were at me. Maybe they'll put anonymous at the end. And basically the very, very few times I've received something like that, I just think it's a hate note. It's just a hate letter. And most of the time, too, you can't understand what they're trying to tell you, so you're lost. So I can't even go and ask this person, well, what were you trying to tell me? I don't think that's the love that the new man is supposed to show. I think if we are angry with our brother or our sister or with our church family as a whole, we need to communicate that anger in a healthy way to correct, to resolve, to reconcile, not just to destroy the other person. Not just to hurt the other person's feeling. This would be a better way to use that anger, that energy. Number 4, what if I'm angry about false doctrine? I'm angry about it. I see people preaching things that aren't true. People that are just pulling stuff out of the air, making up stuff, and it's not in the Bible. That makes me angry. Well, do I use that anger as a motivation to do harm? Or do I use that as a motivation to teach? Let's turn to Acts 15. Acts 15. Maybe one of the best examples of someone being angry about false doctrine. We learn that there's certain men from Judea, Jewish Christians that are going to come, and they're going to start teaching people, these Gentiles, that they have to be circumcised under the new covenant to receive salvation. And of course, that is wrong. That is not something that Jesus or the apostles taught. Chapter 15, verse 1, we're going to see how Paul and Barnabas feel about this. And certain men came down from Judea and taught the brethren, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. Therefore, when Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and dispute with them, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain others of them should go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders about this question. So being sent on their way by the church, they passed through Phoenicia and Samaria, describing the conversion of the Gentiles, and they caused great joy to all of the brethren. So someone's teaching false doctrine in verse 2. How do they feel about it? And I love the way that Luke phrases it. They had no small dissension or dispute with them. That's in my version. They had no small dissension. So what does that mean? That means they had a big dissension, right? It means they had a big dispute. It's something that they were angry about. How could someone be teaching someone something that's not true, that's not of Jesus Christ? So what did they do? Verse 3. Well, they passed through these churches in Phoenicia and Samaria, describing the conversion of the Gentiles. What they did is they taught. And they taught more accurately the things of the doctrine of Jesus Christ. That should be a motivation to teach. I am not against preaching on the street. I am against street preachers. And this is what I mean by this. I think, number one, if you're angry about false doctrine, to go out in public and to preach to no audience whatsoever, you're just yelling, that gets nothing done. Because simply, you don't have an audience. When Jesus taught in public, he had an audience and he began to teach. When Paul or Peter taught in public, they had an audience and they began to teach. That's great. But when you don't have an audience, that doesn't make sense. And when you see people out there that are obviously very, very angry, and they are only preaching and teaching about the end of times. You never see anyone out there preaching about the Ethiopian eunuch. You never see someone out there teaching about the book of Philippians. It's always about the end of times, and it always seems to do harm. That what they're looking out there to do is to do harm. And I think many members of the church have fallen in the same way. When they go out to teach, to instruct, all they want to do is do harm. What they don't want to teach about the Ethiopian eunuch, they want to teach about the destruction that's coming. They don't want to give the whole counsel of God, everything in it. They just want to give the parts that hurt. That's not the whole counsel of God. That's not what Jesus died for. He died for redemption. So what we do is when we're angry about false doctrine, we use it just like Paul Barnes to go out and to teach more accurately. If you're angry about false doctrine, go out and teach the whole counsel of God. Don't just go out to be cruel and to do harm. That doesn't fit the blueprint we see in the book of Acts. Number five. What if you're angry about your life? I'm angry about my life situation right now. What am I going to use that motivation for? Am I going to use it to run from God, or am I going to use it as motivation to be with God? Let me use Saul as an example. And I already used him once in my introduction. I'm going to bring him up again. But Saul, especially after David's come to power and he's recognized by the people of Israel, Saul becomes like one of the most angry people in the Bible. He is constantly angry. We see him in chapter 15 when he really falls. What it is he's supposed to kill all the people of Amalek, but instead he keeps King Agag alive and some of the better possessions that they had. He keeps him alive, and Samuel finds out that Saul's been disobedient. So then Samuel becomes angry. And Samuel comes and he rebukes Saul, and he goes and he kills King Agag like God told him to do, and makes sure that God's commandment there was kept. So we see anger used in a righteous way there. What happens is after this moment, God decides to leave Saul. And what we see in the next chapter in 16 is he's going to go find the son of Jesse, David, and God's going to have Samuel anoint him to be the next king. we learn that the Spirit of the Lord leaves Saul in some way. Verse 14 of chapter 16 of 1 Samuel. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a distressed spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servant said to him, surely a distressing spirit from God is troubling you. And what they do is they have this solution. Since the Spirit of the Lord has left you, since you're distressed, we're going to get David to come and play the harp for you. And when David comes and plays the harp for you, apparently, we see at the end of the chapter, it made Saul feel better. I have no clue why David playing the harp made Saul feel better about the Spirit of the Lord leaving him. Please do not ask me. I just know that's what happened in 1 Samuel. Now, as he's coming and he's playing the harp for him, he becomes more and more angry as David's popularity grows. So, in chapter 18, if we look there, we learn about how the women are singing in verse 7. And it says in verse 7 of chapter 18, so the women sang as they danced and said, Saul has slain his thousands, David his 10,000s. Obviously, if you were the king of Israel, and people were out there singing about how David, who was not king, has slain more Philistines than you have, it would be a reason to feel the way Saul's going to feel next. Verse 8, then Saul was very angry, and the saying displeased him, and he said, they have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed only thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom? So Saul eyed David from that day forward. And it happened on the next day that the distressing spirit from God came upon Saul. That's what we already read about. And he prophesied inside the house. So David played music with his hand as the other times. But there was a spear in Saul's hand. And Saul cast the spear, for he said, I will pin David to the wall. But David escaped his presence twice. Now Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. So, of course, Saul's solution. He's angry. He's motivated to do something. And what he decides that he's going to use his anger to do is to throw this spear and pin David on the wall. Meaning that he was going to kill him, right? He was going to kill David because he was angry. Now, I think when we get angry about our lives, and maybe it's like going back to James, or maybe in Saul's case, it's really focused on jealousy. That I see someone living a better life than the life that I want, and I'm not living the life that I want. What we end up doing is we run from God, we run from the solution, and we attack the person we're jealous of. Because through the rest of Saul's life, except for maybe when he tries to get the seer to bring Samuel back, which was dumb in its own situation, but he gives up on God. Saul doesn't try to go back to God. Saul doesn't try to go reconcile with God. Instead, he spends the rest of his life trying to kill David. That was the way he used his anger and ran from God and tried to kill someone who was innocent. When Saul, what he really should have done is he should have been angry about his life, angry about his situation, but he took it as motivation to be with God like David was. And if he did that, maybe we would have had a different story of the life of Saul. If he took that anger and was constructive with it. There's 5 points about what we can do with our anger. Something you do need to be angry about is if you are in sin, you need to be angry about that. You need to be angry about your spiritual situation. I'm going to give another introduction that I had planned. Every time I've gone to a university or gone and put to a school, what you always have is the police officer that runs the campus PD. He'll come and he'll talk to you about safety. And what he does is he tells you that there's these blue lights all over campus, and if someone's trying to attack you and hurt you, you need to run and you need to hit these blue lights. And they're going to be able to help you in some way. They're going to come and track you down by the blue lights. The other thing, I've gone to 3 different colleges, they all say the same thing. If the person attacks you, actually catches you, you don't need to be afraid. What you need to do is you need to get angry. Because if you get angry that you're being attacked, you're more willing to put up a better fight. And that person, the attacker, is going to give up on you because you're willing to put up a fight. And that's what I've always been told over again. So you know what I'm going to do if I get attacked? I'm going to put up a fight. I'm not going to be angry. That same principle is so applicable to our spiritual lives. If you understand that you're being attacked by your sin, you're being attacked by Satan, if you truly get angry about that, what you're going to do is you're going to put up a fight. And what you're really going to do is you're going to get on the side of the person that can really put on a fight. And that person is Jesus Christ. Because when your sin tries to fight him, he is always going to win. But what you have to do is you have to realize that you do need to put up a fight. And that's going to come by being angry about your spiritual life. Knowing that God can reconcile, God can save, God can put up a fight with your spiritual life, and God will win the victory for you. If there's any way we can assist you in getting connected with God's help this morning, please.